So let's take a look at some of the regional outlooks. The U.S., very typical to the global economy, 4.5%, 5% growth rate through 2021, returning to basically full employment, maybe a 5% unemployment rate. We are going to see a weaker dollar. Currency strengthening against the dollar. The dollar's been very, very strong since the Great Recession. I think you're going to see the recent trend of weakening continue. And as I mentioned, that 2% inflation, modest inflation. So sort of the Goldilocks scenario. I'm not going to get into it today. We're focusing on the economy. In our next video, we'll talk more specifically about the stocks and bond market. But I do think, at least in the short to midterm, you're going to have sort of this Goldilocks scenario of regrowth along with low interest rates and low inflation. The bankruptcies seem to be contained for now in the U.S. The stimulus and paycheck protection program and some other government programs seem to have kept bankruptcies at bay. One of the things that concerns me is watching the rental market. So most states and federal government have enacted policies that prevent the eviction of renters for non-payment. And so as those policies start to expire, we need to keep an eye on that and what effect it will have. Yesterday, President-elect Joe Biden announced a $1.9 trillion package, stimulus package. In fact, today we see the market going down a little bit. It's a little bit higher than was originally expected. And so the market's taking a little bit of time to digest that. But certainly in the short term, intermediate term, most people, myself included, fiscal government stimulus has a positive effect on the economy. As I already mentioned, long-term debt, who knows how that's going to work out. The debt levels are very high, but certainly in the short term, it helps. We've also seen pledges for increased spending on infrastructure, healthcare, education, those type of things. So in addition to this COVID stimulus, I think you're going to see over the next several years when President Biden takes office and the Democratic Senate and Congress, I think you're going to see a lot of stimulus packages in all these different type of areas, once again, that will be short-term help to stimulate that economy. As long as confidence that we're not overdoing it continues in the short term, it will be a positive thing. We also see a lot of strength in the housing market here in the U.S., some pent-up demand from the early spring and into the summer when people weren't going anywhere. People looking for new houses that have home offices in them, a little bit bigger home. You got the kids running around at home. You got two parents trying to work at home. Definitely some pent-up demand. Inventory of homes is at one of the lowest levels in recent memory right now. A lot of demand there. You've also got obviously the low interest rates contributing to that as well. So positive on the housing market. State and local governments that don't have the ability to print money like the federal government, some concerns there, especially some states that tend to be on the fiscally undisciplined side and do a lot of spending. We're starting to see some state and local budgets get stretched out by the coronavirus. As some of the benefits wind up, trying to pay unemployment benefits and housing subsidies and rent programs and all those type of things, we are starting to see some of that, and they're definitely going to need some federal assistance, or you're going to start to see some states in some real trouble. They can't print money like the federal government. Okay, so the U.S. outlook, just to kind of summarize, similar to the global outlook, 4.5%, 5% growth in 2021. Lots of stimulus continuing, inflation remaining low, interest rates remaining low, return to pre-pandemic levels should happen in 2021. Now let's take a look over in Europe, the Eurozone. Going to be a lot similar to the US. Their pandemic, different countries experience it at different specific times, but all in all, largely the same experience. You have Sweden and Italy and France and Germany, and each one kind of has their own coronavirus curve, and we can argue about who did it better than, the other guy and who did it. But essentially, unless you lived in a totalitarian country that completely locked their population down, everyone experienced similar curves, similar dislocations of the economy. We saw that in the Eurozone. Going forward, we're going to see increased cooperation, increased interdependence on those economies. Similar, as you all know, your geography, there are countries there, but a lot of the countries are smaller than some of our states. And so people with the travel and things like that in the Eurozone is much freer, similar to like we have between our states. It's going to require a lot more cooperation in the Eurozone, and we're seeing it, not that they aren't, but even though each country has their own economy and their own leaders and things like that, to pull out of this pandemic is going to require a really coordinated response, both monetarily from the European Central Bank as well as from the countries themselves. And we're definitely seeing that at this point. Now, the UK, as you know, is kind of on its own. The Brexit did happen. They did come to an agreement to exit the Eurozone. They got an agreement in place, and their economy a little bit worse than the Eurozone, a little bit more dependent on hospitality and some of the services affected. And so we see their recession was a little bit worse, their recovery taking a little bit longer than some of the other countries in the Eurozone, but they are on a path to, 7-8% growth this year in 2021, and should also, like the US and the rest of the Eurozone, pull out of it. There are some Brexit factors involved here. Most estimates of the Brexit process, while the UK is not going to collapse and fall into the North Sea, most estimates do feel like there's some reduction in productivity and labor for the UK. There was sort of the seamless transition of labor and products throughout the Eurozone, with the UK leaving that. Now the ability of workers to go seamlessly across the channel there to mainland have been restricted. And so there's going to be some degree of productivity loss. It's also, with COVID hitting and Brexit at the same time, it's going to be a lot more difficult to figure out what are COVID effects and what are Brexit effects. But I think we will see the UK return to pre-COVID levels once again, with a little bit of Brexit effect in there, lower productivity, as they sort out some of the exact terms of how Brexit is going to work out. China, talk about China. So China, we're looking at about 9% growth for the year. Essentially, by the end of 2020, they were back to pre-COVID levels, both increasing some of their exports, some of their commerce with other countries, but by stimulating internal demand. Infrastructure projects in China, whether they need them or not, real estate, funding real estate growth, and the state-owned enterprises that are backed by the government give China's economy sort of a unique, we can debate another time whether it's good or bad, but certainly in this instance, it allows them to prop up those entities. It allows them directly, rather than through, a PPP mechanism or something like that we have to do here in the US, as well as these massive infrastructure projects that they're engaging in. The Chinese central bank was less stimulative than in the global financial crisis. They were able, because it's a totalitarian communist country, they are able to lock their people down. Here in the US, whether you think that's right or wrong, we're not. We are more of a freedom-loving people, and we don't have that ability to just tell people they can't leave their home. And I don't think we're ever going to see that here in the US, but that is what China is able to do, the monitoring of their people. They can tell where they are. I was looking at some things, and a lot of countries are using they're using drones to monitor their citizens, and if they, to prevent them from leaving their house. I just don't think you're going to see that here in the U.S. anytime soon. But anyway, the point is they are able to lock their citizenry down, and so that has helped them limit the spread of COVID. I think you'll continue to see this sort of bilateral volatility between the U.S. and China, the trade imbalances, the ascendance of the Chinese military, the ambitions of China around the world. And so I do think you'll continue to see U.S.-China tensions as we go forward, as long as it stays in sort of the Cold War fashion. It's not necessarily harmful. Holding China accountable, they've are very closed society in terms of allowing foreign, not just U.S., but other foreign goods, services, and companies to enter their country and do business there. And as long as they take that approach, I think a less open approach to them is warranted and is good for the economy. And you're going to see sort of these super blocks. President-elect Biden has already talked about it, about assembling sort of the democracies of the world, re-engaging, Europe, Australia, Japan, all those together to bring China into sort of the way the rest of the world does things, and to allow their country to be open for goods and services. So I think you'll see that tension continue. The reworking of the global supply chains is not going to collapse the Chinese economy by any extent. It is going to have some effects on the margins. Other countries, I think you're going to see benefit from it as well, shifting some of those supply chains out of China, both onshoring to the home country, but also to some other countries in Latin America and Asia. But it's certainly a reworking of the supply chain is not going to completely decimate the Chinese economy at all. Over in Japan, they've been less affected by other developed countries. Really kind of surprising given the age of their population. But they haven't been unscathed, but a little bit less, I think, than people anticipated. Similar path to recovery as other economies. They did lose their Prime Minister Abe, who's famous for Abenomics. He is retired at the end of last year. His successor, I'm sorry, I can't recall his name right now, but his successor is kind of in the same mold as PM Abe, and he'll probably continue a lot of those same policies. As I mentioned earlier, Japan has been fighting deflation for many, many years, and Abenomics was the Prime Minister's plan to keep the economy moving despite deflation and those stagnated effects of their population. Other emerging markets, here we start to see kind of a break. The developed world and China return to growth fairly quickly. Some of the other developing markets, Latin America, India, Western Asia, so Eastern Asia like South Korea, Indonesia, some of those places that are more modern, more advanced, Singapore, you're going to see them follow more the developed country rebound path, but your Western Asian economies are really hit hard. India probably affected their economy the most, and they're really struggling to get control of this virus, and probably will have the most fragile recovery. These countries, not only, they just have a poor economy. They struggle with healthcare to begin with. They struggle with very populous countries with some rural aspects to them, and getting that under control in a pandemic is very difficult. We've seen it before with other health crises in some of these countries. In Africa, certainly the same thing with Latin America, Mexico, Central America, South America. These countries are going to have a lot harder time from the recovery. They're also very commodity dependent. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. Is not only are they going to have trouble getting COVID under control and getting their population vaccinated and back to good health, but they're also very commodity dependent, which the global economy has reduced the need for some of those commodities and has really hurt them. We do expect some recovery, probably more into 2022 before they are able to fully recover from this COVID recession, COVID-caused recession in those economies. Okay, so just kind of in summary, across the globe, we do see, for the most part, return to somewhat normalcy. I give that, very high likelihood of occurring as we get into the summer. Low inflation, interest rates continue to be low around the world. Government stimulus will continue to be prevalent going forward for some period of time. So next, in our next series of videos, we'll talk about this sort of broad overview of the economy and how it is going to affect the stock and bond and credit markets specifically. But for today, I just want to set the stage talking about the economic aspect of it. We'll get to the specific markets in our next video.